This is the latest forecast for Hurricane Ian as of Monday, September 26th, as of 5 p.m. Keep in mind that this forecast is fluid and will change over the coming hours and coming days, so continue to check back for the latest updates, not only with first-hand weather, but with your local media outlets as well as the National Hurricane Center. Ian has really started to get its act together. This is the current IR imagery. Notice that we're really seeing that organization, and this system is reflecting that in the winds. The winds are now up to 100 miles per hour. Those are the maximum sustained winds with Ian, and that is a Category 2 hurricane, and further intensification is expected over the next couple of days. Now, Ian is still to the south of Cuba, expected to eventually cross over Cuba. So let me go ahead and just show you that forecast cone. Expecting this system to continue to start to move more northerly, you can see that there is more of a north-northwesterly motion, around 13 miles per hour with Ian. So it went from the west-northwest to the northwest, now to the north-northwest, and eventually expecting more of a northerly component to that motion on our Tuesday before more of a northeasterly motion once we get toward the mid and end parts of this week. Now, we are expecting Ian to become a major hurricane over the coming hours, which again is a Category 3 hurricane or stronger, and that is expected relatively quickly, as Ian is already a 100-mile-per-hour hurricane, and Ian's not going to stop there. Once it crosses over Cuba overnight into Tuesday, expecting that intensification to really take shape. And even though it's crossing over land, the terrain that it's going to cross over is not the most rugged, and it's a pretty narrow strip of Cuba that this system will move over, so it's not expected to completely deteriorate the center of the system. That's why it's really going to ramp up once it crosses over into those very warm waters of the southeastern Gulf of Mexico. Talking about water temperatures between 86 and 90 degrees. That's bath water, folks, and that's going to feed this system and intensify the system into at least a Category 4 hurricane, a strong Category 4 hurricane with winds, maximum sustained winds of at least 140 miles per hour. The current forecast from the National Hurricane Center suggests Ian will become that Category 4 hurricane early Wednesday morning. So this is more Tuesday night, early Wednesday morning. That's when Ian will become that Category 4, if not stronger, as it feeds off of those warm waters. Now, this is going to be well off the coast of Florida, but it's still going to be close enough in proximity to already start bringing those impacts into parts of Florida. And you can see that there are already hurricane warnings as well as tropical storm warnings in effect for parts of Florida. Hurricane warning is the red highlighted areas. So parts of Florida are under that hurricane warning. That also does extend down into parts of the Keys as well as western Cuba. And then there's that tropical storm warning for the blue shaded areas. And then where you see the yellow shaded areas in Florida, that is actually a tropical storm watch. And at some point, it's possible that that does get upgraded. There's also a hurricane watch, those pink shaded areas that are just to the north and south of the hurricane warning. So this system is going to not only intensify, but eventually it's going to slow down. Once it starts to turn toward the north and eventually the northeast on Wednesday, this system's just going to really slow down. There's an area of high pressure to the north that's really going to just allow this system to only slowly start creeping to the north and northeast. Now, the one good thing is, as this system does slow and it starts to encounter some wind shear and a little bit of drier air, it will start to lessen in intensity, but it's still going to cause significant impacts to parts of Florida and then eventually parts of the southeast and mid-Atlantic. So don't let your guard down, even though this system possibly could weaken before making landfall. Landfall still uncertain just exactly where and when landfall will occur, but it's looking like it'll be sometime late Wednesday, early Thursday, just depending on how far west or east or essentially north or south in Florida this system makes that landfall. So again, anytime from late Wednesday to early Thursday looks like a pretty good possibility of landfall. But again, impacts will start being realized way ahead of that landfall, and then notice that system starts to slowly work its way toward parts of Georgia as well as the Carolinas from Friday into Saturday. So this is going to be a system we're going to continue to talk about for really the next several days. Here's a little bit of a closer look at that cone. I wanted to zoom in to show you where right now the National Hurricane Center is indicating there's that best likelihood for that landfall. Notice the cone has really narrowed and is really confined to far eastern parts of the Panhandle as well as the Florida Peninsula. That's where that cone is included. So if you are anywhere within the cone or near it, you just want to continue to keep a very close eye on that forecast over the coming days, again, because some slight changes are expected with this system as it is a very fluid forecast. One of the big concerns with the current expected intensity and track of Hurricane Ian is the storm surge. The storm surge is going to be significant and life-threatening. Pretty much all of the western coast of Florida will see at least a couple foot storm surge, with some areas approaching 10 feet. That does include near Tampa Bay, could see upwards of a 10 feet storm surge. This would cause some significant inundation impacts, life-threatening situations and impacts with this storm surge. This is one of the biggest things with hurricanes, especially large, intense hurricanes. And the way that the coastline, kind of the geomorphology of that area is set up, it's just a very gradual, slowly declining shelf that's off of the Florida coast, off the West Florida coast. So essentially, that storm surge can get pushed up and build and build and build. And with that slow motion and that expected track north just off of the western coast of Florida, that's going to pile that water up. And that's why we are expecting such a large storm surge. And it's possible that some areas could actually see more than a 10-foot storm surge. But regardless, no matter if you're in this zone that's expected to see 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, or 10, don't look at those numbers too specifically. This is going to be a very impactful system. Just make sure that you are taking it seriously. And if you are already in an area that has been asked to evacuate, please do so. Please listen to your local officials and authorities because they're just trying to do what is best. And you probably want to make sure you have a plan of action in place by the end of tomorrow, if not sooner. That way you know what you need to do and you can get out of that situation you're in, because you know, folks, the roadways are going to be completely gridlocked at times as many people try to depart Florida to get away from the system. Here's a little bit of a closer zoomed in storm surge map for the southwestern coast of Florida. Again, Tampa could see, the Bay Area could see upwards of 10 feet of that storm surge. Even some of the Keys are going to see significant storm surge as well. So the entire southwestern coast of Florida under the gun for some pretty significant storm surge from eventually major Hurricane Ian. The next thing we're focused on, so we have the storm surge, we're also focused on some very heavy rainfall. As we talked about, Ian really starts to slow down from Wednesday into Thursday as well as Friday, and that's going to allow for copious amounts of moisture and rainfall for pretty much all of Florida, from the eastern panhandle across all of the Florida peninsula down into South Florida, expecting a widespread 4 to 10 inches of rain with isolated amounts between 10 to 20 inches with this system. So some significant impacts are expected. Freshwater flooding will become a concern, street flooding across Florida, and then eventually even into parts of Georgia, southern, central, maybe northern parts of Georgia, as well as the Carolinas, going to see some significant rainfall. Even coastal parts of Georgia, southern parts of Georgia, coastal South Carolina, coastal parts of North Carolina, as well as the Outer Banks, could see 4 to, in some cases, 10 inches of rain. And there could also be a little bit of terrain-induced rainfall for potentially eastern parts of the foothills and the eastern slopes of some of the mountains in parts of Georgia and the Carolinas. So just keep that in mind, that there will be a pretty significant rain threat and freshwater flooding threat as we go through Wednesday, Thursday, Friday into Saturday. And a little bit of a closer look over Florida. This just shows you which areas could see some of the heaviest rain. Notice under the gun, we're talking about Miami, Tampa Bay, Orlando, Jacksonville, even Tallahassee, Gainesville, all under that threat for significant rainfall, possibly exceeding half a foot. Some isolated areas exceeding a foot of rain. Here's some of the key messages. This is from the National Hurricane Center. Again, like we focus on life-threatening storm surge, hurricane force winds, flash floods, and possible mudslides are expected for western Cuba, and then eventually that flood threat shifts north as we work our way into late Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday into parts of Florida, and then eventually Georgia and the Carolinas. So there's a danger with a life-threatening storm surge along much of Florida's west coast. Again, that's where some areas could see upwards of a 10-feet storm surge. So right now, the highest risk is from Fort Myers to the Tampa Bay region. Those residents are asked to listen to their local officials, and if they're asking you to evacuate, please do so. Hurricane force winds, that's one thing we didn't touch on too much. We talked more about that flood threat from the surge as well as the rainfall, but hurricane force winds are going to occur with this system for pretty much most of Florida. And then there's going to be some winds that also are tropical storm force extending into Georgia as well as the Carolinas. But with this system becoming a major hurricane, especially the western coast of Florida could see some significant wind damage, sustained winds of possibly 100, 110 miles per hour with some gusts upwards of 130 miles per hour. So please just make sure that you are taking this seriously. I'll go ahead and I'll zoom in on this if possible. I was going to try to show you the time frame of when to expect some of those winds across Florida as well as the southeast. This gives you an idea of when there will be some wind threats for this area. Notice we start seeing those tropical storm force winds already moving into the Keys on Tuesday. That starts shifting north into Wednesday, Thursday, possibly Thursday midday. Start seeing some winds across southern parts of Georgia, and then eventually that does work its way north into the Carolinas Friday into Saturday. So again, Ian is intensifying. It is a 100-mile-per-hour Category 2 hurricane expected to become a Category 4 with maximum sustained winds of 140 miles per hour. Storm surge is one of the biggest things we're worried about. Secondary threat will be some of that flooding from the heavy rainfall. There will also be hurricane force winds across Florida. And don't forget about that tornado threat as well from some of those outer bands. There will be a substantial tornado threat for parts of Florida and then eventually southern Georgia as well as the coastal parts of South Carolina.